The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We're really excited to have you all here for this discussion we're going to have today. It's all going to focus on safety performance measures for pedestrians and bicyclists, a topic that I'm sure all of you are really interested in and devoted to. The webinar will explore the measures and the metrics that we use to monitor and track safety outcomes for non-motorized road users, with a specific focus on the efforts underway at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the Federal Highway Administration, and some federal work being done, and some reporting requirements going down to states, NPOs, RPOs, and local agencies. So really interested in this topic, and we'll have some good presentations ready for you today. The webinar is supported by the Federal Highway Administration's Office of Safety through a program that's led by VHB and the UNC Highway Safety Research Center that provides training and technical assistance to the FHWA designated pedestrian and bicyclist focus cities and states. My name is Dan Jeline, and I'm going to be facilitating today's webinar. I'd like to quickly just introduce you to each of the panelists joining us today. Amy Schick works at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's Grants Management and Operations Office, providing technical assistance to states through NHTSA's 10 regional offices. She's supported NHTSA's work in a variety of areas, including EMS, occupant protection, and distracted driving, and previously worked as an EMT paramedic and served in the U.S. Army. David Kopaz is a safety engineer with the Federal Highway Administration's Resource Center and the Office of Safety. He spent 28 years with FHWA, which includes division positions with division offices in Wisconsin, Minnesota, California, and Illinois, among others. Amy and Dave have a lot of important information to share with us today about safety performance measures, and we're really excited to have them with us today. I just have a couple of things that I wanted to cover in the housekeeping, on the housekeeping side of things for you. You won't have the ability as attendees during the webinar today to speak up, but you will have the ability to submit questions to us using the question feature in the GoToWebinar control panel. Please submit questions or comments to us at any time. I'll be monitoring those, and we'll get to as many of them as we can following the presentations when we have a few minutes set aside for a Q&A period at the end of the hour. We've already posted presentation slides as a PDF format file on our archive page. In a moment, I'll be sending that link out to each one of you, but you can find that at pedbikeinfo.org/webinars and follow the link to this webinar. We are encouraging anyone who experiences any technical issues, computer freezing up, or audio problems to try to just reload the webinar and log back in. You should be able to correct the problem in that way. We have already posted the archive material, which I'll be sending out to you again shortly, that link. We are also recording this webinar, and so we plan on our archive page to post this recording within about a day. And we are sending a follow-up email later today with a lot of this information. It's going to have a link to the archive page with a copy of the presentations where you can find the recording and a lot of other information like that. One of the pieces of information in that email will be a link to generate a certificate of attendance. And so it's important that if you have colleagues attending the webinar with you today and you're the one who registered, if you receive that email, please just forward that around so that everybody can generate their own certificate of attendance for the webinar. We also submitted the webinar to the American Planning Association for 1 CM credit. So if that applies to you, please check their event calendar and find more information there about how to claim that credit. You can find a lot of information about all of our webinars by visiting pedbikeinfo.org/webinars. You can find past episodes, which we've all posted there and on our YouTube channel. You can also find information about any upcoming webinars that we have planned. The PBIC provides information on a regular basis about all the webinars that are going on, along with a lot of other news. If you want to sign up for the mailing list or join us, follow us on social media, you can do that with the links we have here. I'm going to take a quick poll of the audience just before we get into our presentations today. We're interested in finding out about how many people are out there today joining us. So if you don't mind taking a moment to just cast your vote here, it may just be you, a small group, a few more people. Just let us know about how many people are out there. We're really interested in how many folks are attending our webinars, whether you're attending with groups or not. We always encourage people to have a few colleagues join you who may not be as familiar with some of the topics we discuss, and then maybe have some conversation about them afterward. So if you could let us know, maybe if you're with a group today, or how many people are out there, we'd appreciate it. I'm only going to leave this open for probably 5 more seconds. So if you haven't voted yet, please do that, because I'm just about to close the poll so we can move right into our presentations. All right, thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll down. We appreciate that information. Without any further delay, I want to go ahead and turn things over to our first panelist today, Amy Schick with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, to get things started. So Amy, if you take a look at your screen, you should see a little alert come across. Now I see your screen, and if you go into presentation mode, now you're all set. Please take it over whenever you're ready.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Dan, and thank you to any of your colleagues at the Highway Safety Research Center for hosting this webinar. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate folks taking time to join us this afternoon. Real briefly, again, my name is Amy Schick. I'm from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. For those of you not familiar with NHTSA, NHTSA is one of the modal administrations within the U.S. Department of Transportation. So briefly today, there's a few items I'd like to discuss. The first is a high-level overview of the 2016 fatality data that was released within the past month. Then we'll discuss NHTSA's target setting requirements for behavioral highway safety performance measures, and we'll very briefly touch upon the model minimum uniform crash criteria and serious injury reporting requirements, and I'll conclude with some references and resources. Okay, so let's jump right in. The 2016 data overview. So according to NHTSA's FARS fatality analysis and reporting system, we learned that 37,461 people lost their lives on our roadways in 2016. And unfortunately, this represents an increase of nearly 2,000 fatalities from 2015. And that also is about 5.6% above the previous year. And we are in a time where we are continuing to experience an uptick in fatalities. Between the period of 1963 to 1964, there was a 9% increase, and then of late there was a steady decrease, but now we're on a slight uptick as well. Along with that, vehicle miles traveled has increased in 2016, and the fatality rate did also increase in 2016. Okay. So before I share some high-level pedestrian and bike fatality data, I wanted to provide some definitions on what NHTSA considers a pedestrian and a bicyclist for inclusion in the FARS data set. Keep in mind that the mission of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is to reduce motor vehicle fatalities. So there was some questions submitted prior to the webinar on whether bicycle-to-bicycle fatalities were included. They are not included in the FARS data set. So, for example, NHTSA defines a pedestrian as any person on foot who walks, runs, jogs, hikes, or sits or lies down. A pedocyclist is defined as a bicyclist and other cyclists. This can include two-wheel, non-motorized vehicles, tricycles, unicycles. And again, the FARS data set does not include pedestrian and bicycle crashes that do not involve motor vehicles. And I just want to emphasize here, because I think many folks don't realize that. Again, the focus for the FARS data set is on motor vehicle fatality data. And also, motor vehicle crashes that occur on private property are also not included in the FARS data set. Okay, so with those background definitions of what's included in the FARS data set, in 2016, nearly 6,000 pedestrians were killed, and this also represents an increase from the prior year. And we saw also that 840 pedocyclists, most commonly bicyclists, lost their lives in 2016, again, an increase from the previous year. Okay. So the reason I wanted to include this slide here, it's a lot of data points, but it gives you a very quick glimpse at the proportion of the ped-bike fatality problem in comparison to other non-occupants in and outside of the vehicle. So I know we don't have a lot of time to spend on this slide, but you can quickly just do a visual gauge to see the proportion of ped-bike fatalities. And I'll just leave that here up for another moment or two. Okay. And just another slide to depict the data. You can see, unfortunately, the increasing trend of pedestrian fatalities beginning in 2009 and continuing to 2016. Okay. So I want to take a moment here to show an interesting slide. This is the proportion of fatalities by road user. Now, if you look here in the blue text, this is fatalities inside the vehicle. So we can consider that occupants passenger vehicle occupants in the car or truck or large trucks. Outside the vehicle would include motorcyclists, pedestrians, bicyclists, and other non-occupants. Now, what's interesting here, as the percentage of vehicles, or excuse me, persons inside the vehicle continued to increase, we saw a decrease in fatalities outside the vehicle, but that is shifting here of late. So it's an interesting comparison. While overall the total fatality numbers are increasing in 2016, the percentage of persons inside the vehicle is decreasing, but the percentage of persons outside the vehicle is increasing. Okay. Now this is the proportion of fatalities by road user by state. So what's interesting here, I'll just pick a state here. You can see for Kansas, it's approximately 25% of their fatalities involve persons outside the vehicle and 75% of persons inside the vehicle. So again, this is just by state. I'll pause for a moment so you can just do a quick eyeball of your state. But I would imagine most on the line have a pretty good sense of this data.
Amy, while you're on this slide, this is Dan, I just have a quick question for you. You're showing some of this helpful state data, which I think is one of the most useful uses of some of the FARS data that you're talking about, which is having a consistent metric to compare from state to state. I wonder, do you, within FARS, are folks able to also find a city level data? Maybe I'm jumping ahead to something you're going to be talking about, but that question I always get is, can I dive in and find my city and see if I can do some similar comparisons to maybe other peer cities within FARS?
No, Dan, that's a great question. At the end, I can show we have what's called STITSI, the State Traffic Safety Information. So that's state level detail, obviously. And then there are mapping tools within that, but it's not as neat as I think what folks would like, where it's, clearly here's my city, here's the data within that. Like, so you can get a sense of when you drill down in the maps to see, but the short answer to that is, unfortunately, no, it's really not drilled down to that level of specificity.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that.
Okay. So now that we presented a very high-level overview of the national fatality data, I just wanted to pause and take a moment to present how NHTSA calculates injury estimates. For calculating injury estimates, I want to point out that we do not have something comparable to the fatality analysis and reporting system. We do a probability sample for estimating national estimate levels. We are transitioning our methodology. So what NHTSA has, the system we're moving towards, is called the crash report sampling system. And again, the crash report sampling system, it's a sample of police reported crashes involving all motor vehicle types, from property damage only to a fatality crash. And again, the crash report sampling system is how NHTSA estimates the overall crash picture to include not only fatality data, but we realize there's such a big emphasis on serious injury, as there should be, to help us better understand the problems and emerging trends. Okay, and just a continuation of the crash report sampling system. Again, it's we obtain our data from a nationally representative sample. We estimate there's about 5 to 6 million police reported crashes that occur every year in the United States. And NHTSA obtains this data from 60 selected sites that were developed using a very advanced statistical methodology to make national estimates. Okay, so I'm going to switch gear here, moving on to the behavioral performance target setting requirements that NHTSA has. NHTSA works directly with the state highway safety offices. Some of you may be familiar with your state highway safety office. Some, but not all, of the state highway safety offices fall within that state's Department of Transportation, but there are state highway safety offices that may fall within public works departments or law enforcement agencies. So some very high-level background on the NHTSA performance measure requirements. States do have experience with setting performance targets for highway safety measures. They've been doing so voluntarily since 2008. They include performance targets, and I'll discuss this in more detail in my following slides, and their annual highway safety plan. And that's the document that describes the state's entire behavioral highway safety countermeasure strategies that's submitted to NHTSA. Typically it's submitted to NHTSA the July 1st of every year. And now it is a requirement for states to receive grant funding from NHTSA, Section 402 state and community highway safety grants. Within their highway safety plan, they have to include a required list of performance measures to include pedestrian and bicyclist fatality measures, again, which I'll discuss in just a second here. Okay, so here's a list of NHTSA's required highway safety, what we're calling outcome measures. The ones on the left-hand side of the screen are what we call common measures. So state departments of transportation, through their annual plans, have to submit identical measures. And it seems like that would be pretty straightforward. But we have found in past, prior to this requirement, that there were some disconnect between performance measures submitted by state DOTs and highway safety offices. So we're all just working to have a transparent, uniform measure of progress. So again, the measures, the larger measures, number of fatalities, the rate of fatality rate, and the number of serious injuries. And in addition, NHTSA requires that states submit targets on unrestrained occupant fatalities, impaired motorcyclists, speeding-related fatalities, unhelmeted motorcyclists, and a measure for pedestrian fatalities, and a measure for bicyclist fatalities. And the measures are defined based upon the FARS data set. What the state submits to us is their target, their projected number of fatalities, or the decreases that they want to make based on their implemented countermeasures. Okay. And very quickly, in addition to the performance measures that I just mentioned, State Highway Safety Office also submit performance measures for observed seatbelt use and some grant-funded activity measures for national mobilization, such as Click It or Ticket. Okay. And I also want to point out here, for state highway safety offices, for instance, if they're submitting a pedestrian program area within their highway safety plan, they would again have to include a pedestrian fatality target, but we'd also encourage them to submit additional measures that may be unique to the data sets and problem ID of their state. And this is beyond even the pedestrian program area. For example, if a state has a drug to driving problem and is using NHTSA grant funds for that, we would also ask that they include a specific performance measure related to that drug driving problem. Okay, and again, some more information, very high level, on the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's performance measure requirements. We ask that the State Highway Safety Office give us a documentation of current safety levels. So tell us where you've been. As with any performance measure, to know where you're going, you have to know where you've been. That the performance measure is quantifiable. It's an annual performance measure. And we also ask that the State Highway Safety Office, work to give us a justification that explains how the target is data-driven. And I think that's the key here. The whole emphasis on performance measures and targets is this alignment with how can you reach your goals? What countermeasures and projects can you have in place to achieve your projected targets? And certainly, whenever possible, we would encourage states to represent an improvement from the current status rather than a simple maintenance of effort. But we realize, in light of the current fatality picture, that certainly is a challenge. Okay, so some basic target setting processes for those. Many of you may work with your highway safety offices to help develop and establish the targets. If not, I certainly would encourage you to do so. But again, a high level, how does the state set performance targets? Well, first and foremost, use data. Look at past available trends. Again, where have you been? What is your data picture telling you? But in addition to using fatality data and injury data, we would also urge the states and with their local partners to consider other non-fatality data sources that may include economic activity, population, demographic trends, etc. Then again, I just can't put enough emphasis on this point here. Identify the data on expected countermeasure strategy impact, and I certainly acknowledge that can be challenging with behavioral countermeasures. Sometimes there isn't a clear indication if I do X, I can expect it to save so many lives. It certainly is a challenge. It's an art form. It's not an exact science. And then based upon this information, that's how you come up with your forecast fatality reduction based on this planned implementation of your countermeasure strategies. Okay. So switching gears slightly a bit, so NHTSA analyzed state performance measure targets for calendar years 2014 and 2015 to get a sense of how aggressive the target was. And we're doing this for 2016, and I apologize that I don't have the 2016 data available for this presentation. So certainly we realize that most states do set very aggressive targets. So what this slide represents, this is when a state highway safety office set their performance target, we compared that target to the latest available data that was available at the time the target was established. So we acknowledge there's always going to be a time lag with the data. So for example, this year when states submitted their fiscal year, or excuse me, their calendar year 2018 highway safety performance targets, they submitted that to NHTSA this past July, and the latest available data to them was 2015 fatality data. So again, there is a little bit of a data lag, but I want to point out here, when states, again, submitted their 2014 and 2015 targets, they were projecting a decrease of about 13% for bike fatalities and 8.5% for the pedestrian fatalities. So reporting progress. So certainly, it's very important to continue to assess where you've been. So in addition, states report performance targets in their highway safety plan. State highway safety offices also report to NHTSA an annual report that essentially evaluates where they are in terms of meeting their performance target. Okay. So going back to, we saw the earlier slide about the aggressiveness of the target setting reductions that states had projected for calendar years 2014 and 2015. This isn't a slide that just shows overall the percentage of states that met just their total fatality and fatality rate targets. And unfortunately, we saw in calendar year 2013, when the data was available, a little over half the states achieved their total fatality and fatality rate targets. And we saw that this declined in 2014, about 10 to 15 percentage points. And again, we saw another decline in 2015, roughly a third, a little bit more of states meeting their overall total fatality and fatality rate targets. And again, it's very challenging because we certainly acknowledge when states set the performance measure targets for these years, at that time, the data that was available, we hadn't yet started to see this uptick in fatalities. Okay. And here's a breakout. So on the previous slide, I showed you the percentage of meeting targets for the overall measures, total traffic fatalities and fatality rates. I wanted to point out here for pedestrian targets, it's very challenging for states. We saw that only a little more than a quarter of states achieved their pedestrian fatality targets in 2013. It declined to 21% in 2014, and to only 10% of states were able to achieve their pedestrian fatality targets in 2015. And one of the challenges with pedestrian, and particularly bicyclist fatality targets, is the numbers are relatively small in comparison to the overall fatalities. So one large crash event could really skew these numbers. And you may be wondering, well, why weren't we able to determine, if states met their bicyclist fatality targets for the 2013 and 2014 years? This was not a required measure until 2015 when we added the bicyclist performance measure. Okay. So I mentioned earlier in the presentation the identical targets that state highway safety offices that have to work with their state DOT counterparts. Again, it just increases collaboration, coordination among the different offices. That's particularly important for if you reside in a state where your highway safety offices does not fall within your state DOT. And essentially, the targets, they need to be identical. It's transparent to the public. It's one unified goal. We found that really does help towards increasing the likelihood of making progress. Okay, so switching gears once again, I just want to very, very high level touch upon the model minimum uniform crash criteria and serious injury reporting requirements. And again, emphasis, this is at the state level. So what is MUC? MUC is a guideline, a voluntary guideline designed to help states determine what is the most appropriate crash data to collect on their police crash reports. And then again, I don't want to go into too much detail in this presentation, but the web link here is provided on the slides, which will provide all the information you could ever want to know about the model minimum uniform crash criteria. Serious injury reporting requirements. So again, I mentioned that NHTSA does not have a comparable serious injury census as we do for FARS. We do national estimates. States report their serious injury data. And again, I think there's a lot of potential just better understanding serious injury data. But we found when the serious injury numbers that were reported on the national level by states, there was a wide discrepancy. States considered serious injury information to be, one state rather would consider serious injury to be something, whereas another state would have a slightly varied definition. So it was really hard to get a national sense of serious injuries based upon the information we were receiving from states. So NHTSA and the Federal Highway Administration established a new definition that is based upon the MUC 4th edition. And some of you may have noticed that this previous slide, the latest edition of MUC that's available is the 5th edition, but so states can have time to plan and account for the new serious injury definition. That is based on the prior edition, which again, there were no changes between the 4th and 5th edition of that definition. And I don't want to get too far in the weeds there, but again, it was just so states have something to plan for and that there's not this thinking that the requirement for what the definition would change. And this requirement will, is to be in place by April of 2019. Okay, I just wanted to touch again briefly on Vision Zero. Certainly, that is the vision everybody has. We want zero fatalities on our roadways, but we realize it's going to take time. It's going to take hard work. We're not going to get there overnight. That's why the requirement for NHTSA is to report annual performance targets that are data-driven and evidence-based. To work towards that ultimate goal of zero. Again, we're all on the same page. I think that's what we want, but it will take considerable time and effort and resources to get there. Okay, and just real quickly, some references and resources that may be of interest to you in the, for those of you on the line. So this is NHTSA's data page. If you go to nhta.gov, and there'll be a data column on the right-hand side of your screen, or you can use this link directly. So this is essentially a catalog of all of NHTSA publications, and I would encourage you to check this. We've released, again, our 2016 overall national fatality numbers, and within the next few months, we'll be releasing specific fact sheets on pedestrian fatalities, bicyclist fatalities. Typically, those are released around February, March of the calendar year. So there's a great question from Dan about, is this information, the ped bike information, available on the county level? So what NHTSA does have is what we call the State Traffic Safety Information page, where you can go to this link here, and you can drill down by state, and it does provide county level maps, but that may not correspond necessarily with the city boundaries, but it's still a great resource I would encourage you to check out. And there are some questions early on about countermeasures. This is essentially the Traffic Safety Bible for NHTSA's countermeasures that work. I just did a screenshot of the pedestrian or bicyclist countermeasures. It's based upon, we rate them in terms of stars and level of effectiveness, 5 stars being really the most proven effective countermeasure. You can see that there really aren't any 5 stars, but there are some 4-star countermeasures. And I won't go into too much detail here, but just to make you aware that this resource is available to you. And also in terms of, I spoke about the model minimum uniform crash criteria and serious injury reporting. For some, this can be a lot of information, and I know I just breezed over and didn't go over in very much detail, but I do want to let you know that there are NHTSA resources available to states to help you improve your crash data by having more accurate and timely crash data. I think that can help us better plan our programs for pedestrian and bicyclist intervention and countermeasures. So if you're at the local level, I would encourage you to work, again, with your state highway safety offices, and you can request these free resources from NHTSA. One is what we'll call the Crash Data Improvement Program. This resource or technical assistance program looks at the quality of the state crash data and provides very specific recommendations on how you can improve the quality of that data to support your planned project decisions for future years. We also have a technical assistance resource we call Go Teams, and that provides resource to state traffic record persons to really help them with their traffic record data collection management capabilities. And we send with these Go Teams, it's a group of 1 to 3 subject matter experts to really dig deep into a traffic record issue. And I mentioned the MUC, again, mapping. So if you want to see where your state is, the state level crash report aligns with these voluntary guidelines, NHTSA does have a free technical resource where we will essentially, you're mapping your current existing crash report to the guidelines to see where you fall. And we make suggestions on improvements that can be made when you do decide to revise your crash report, understanding that that's a big lift. Okay, and I just wanted to bring it all together. So performance measures, there's a lot of emphasis on performance measures of late, and rightfully so. Why are performance measures so important? They really should be viewed as a highway safety planning tool. Performance measures and targets shouldn't be set in isolation. The real value of performance measures and setting targets is based on your limited resources, whether it be staffing, monetary, what can you do to essentially get the biggest bang for your buck to improve traffic safety? Again, we all want 0 fatalities, but we know sometimes we have to make hard decisions there. So that's why setting performance targets, where can I reasonably expect to get based upon the programs and projects that I have in place. So this ties to the next bullet point. It helps you direct your financial and again, just all your resources to the areas where it can have the biggest impact. Connecting targets to action, and these are all like variations of the same theme. I mentioned it helps with accountability, transparency. It helps you evaluate, where have you been and where are you going and how are you, what progress are you making towards achieving your goal. And it helps communicate priorities to all of your stakeholders. So with that, that's a very quick background on what NHTSA's performance measure requirements are, the 2016 fatality data. And I know we're going to switch over to my colleague from the Federal Highway Administration, and we're going to take questions afterwards. So I look forward to getting those.
Great.
So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Amy, very much. That was a great presentation, and I think it sets up well for some of the discussion we'll have a little bit later. Some questions are already coming in, and I'd encourage you to continue to ask those. We'll have some time afterward to respond to as many as that we can get to. But Dave, right now, I'm going to get things over quickly to you to continue on and talk about the same topic from the FHWA perspective. So we can see your screen now. If you go to slideshow mode, it should go right into it. Okay, you're all set, Dave.
Okay, thanks, Dan, and thanks, Amy. So as was mentioned, I'm with the Federal Highway Administration, and as you heard from Amy, NHTSA has been, embarked on performance management several years ago. Federal Highway is really new to this effort, and so my purpose today is to provide an overview of safety performance management at Federal Highway Administration. I'll give you a little bit of background on where this is coming from. I'll talk about our safety performance measures, and then specifically within that, I'll talk a little about the non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries, which really deals with the PEDs and bikes that we've been focused on for this webinar. So transportation performance management, TPM, for Federal Highway Administration, back in, I think, 2012, MAP 21, which is federal highway legislation that authorizes funds for the federal aid program, required that Federal Highway start establishing a performance-based federal aid highway program. So this is what we've been embarking on over the past few years. Transportation performance management, really, as Amy mentioned, for them, this really gives us an opportunity to look at the data, look at the information that we have, system information from our highways, use that information then to prioritize our needs, and states can then align their resources, across their many needs that they have within their state. So what Congress gave us with transportation performance management are 7 national goals, and they're listed here. You see safety, that's the one I'll be talking about. As I mentioned, in the federal aid program, there are many other programs, I guess, or areas of the highway system that we want to be concerned about. So there's several others listed here. For safety, I'll talk a little bit more specifically about that. The way Federal Highway has set up transportation performance management and the process and how we see this working. Each of those 7 national goals have been identified. Federal Highway, through rulemaking, has established measures, and I'll talk about those for safety in a bit. And then number 3, the place we're at now in our process is the target setting. States have set their first round of targets in August of this past year. MPOs will be setting their targets coming up in February, and I'll talk a little more about that as well. Following the target setting, states then, develop their plans. This would include some plans that they have, longer-term plans, strategic highway safety plans, also the highway safety improvement program, the plans, the projects that are in those plans. So really, those plans should be driven towards meeting those targets ultimately. And then finally, reporting out on what those plans are achieving. Are states meeting their targets? Are they successful? And what maybe needs to change if they're not. Accountability and transparency. Federal Highway will be evaluating the targets that are set by states to see if they're meeting their targets. And then the transparency piece. We think it's important that the public knows what we're doing. Some accountability and transparency is always good for the program to make sure that the public knows how we're spending their tax dollars. So these are the safety performance measures that Federal Highway has established: number of fatalities, rate of fatalities, number of serious injuries, and then a rate of serious injuries. And then a number of non-motorized fatalities plus serious injuries. And as I mentioned, this is the measure that really captures the pedestrian and the safety, pedestrian safety and bicycle safety crash problem. So the non-motorized performance measure, we really established this to recognize that walking and biking have become modes of transportation that are growing every day. Many states are growing at faster rates than others, but we know that this is a growing trend that we see for a mode of transportation. In addition to that, the countermeasures that we have differ from those that we might just view from a motor vehicle standpoint, a motor vehicle crash standpoint. In addition to that, as Amy pointed out, we are seeing increasing trends in the pedestrian and bicycle fatalities across the U.S. Again, they're growing in certain areas more than others, but they are growing, and we need to have a measure we felt to improve upon those numbers. So what is the non-motorized performance measure? Again, I mentioned this. It's an effort to address the non-motorized fatalities addresses the pedestrian and bike fatalities and pedestrian bike serious injuries. They do have to involve a motor vehicle. That's an important point, and Amy made that as well. Our measure here for pedestrian and bikes are crashes involving a motor vehicle, and they're during a calendar year. The data sources that we are using, fatalities measured to the FARS data system, the fatal analysis reporting system that Amy mentioned. So we'll be using that data source to evaluate states on whether they met their targets or not. For serious injuries, as Amy mentioned again, we do not have a national database for serious injuries. So we are going to rely on state motor vehicle crash databases for that information. And if we're going to rely on serious injuries information from the state motor vehicle crash databases, it's important that those numbers be consistent across each state. So we do have in the rule a requirement for a common definition of what a serious injury is, and it uses the CABCO injury scale that will be included in the MUC4, or is included in the MUC4 edition. For states that do not have that or have not adopted the MUC4 edition, there are serious injury conversion tables available to be used. If you have a different, if your state or locality has a different code that you're using to code injuries from pedestrian and bikes. There are conversion tables available to convert those to the CABCO scale. That requirement for meeting the new definition of serious injuries by April 15th of 2019, all states will have to be using the MUC4 edition. We're recommending that states actually adopt that and start using it by the beginning of 2019, really in January. That'll give you an opportunity to have a full year's worth of serious injury crash data that's using the same code. Here's a depiction of what that CABCO is. Essentially, it's a coding convention system that increases in severity from the bottom, from no apparent injury up to K, which is a fatality or injury. And so we're really talking about the A injuries for the purpose of serious injury. So all states will be using this code, or will be required to use this code as of April of 2019. So I thought it'd be good to give an example of, for Federal Highway Administration, how we're recommending that states, look at the data and start establishing targets. We are using a 5-year rolling average for target establishment. And so if you look at what this chart shows here, this is an example of, say, a non-motorized fatality and serious injury. We're combining, for each data point, we're combining a 5-year rolling average and moving across. You'll see, for 2008, that would be a target for the 5 years from 2004 to 2008 and so on. I only went to 2012 on this one, or this graph only goes to 2012. But again, these are rolling averages of the five years encompassed in that data point. So, excuse me. So when those are plotted, you'll get some variation from year to year. Even though it's a 5-year rolling average, that 5-year rolling average does take some of the spikes out that you might see in the data, but you still see some variability. And so, the practice would be to fit the trend line to that. And this is a simple example where it's a linear trend line. And you can see, using this trend line, that if you were setting a target for 2016 or 17, you can see where that data point might fall. So a very simple, demonstration of how you might start to set a target. Now, from this point, this is where really, it takes some expertise or some understanding, I guess, of the variables that are going on. You might want to adjust that trend line for, some demographic shifts for non-motorized. Maybe there's development that you know is going to happen that's going to increase the pedestrian and bicycle use. So this is an opportunity, after you've set this trend line and your data point, to adjust that for some of the influences that may occur. What we're really hoping, for performance management in the safety area is that this results in really developing a performance-based highway safety improvement program. And the highway safety improvement program is one of the federal aid programs that deals specifically with infrastructure-based safety projects. So these are the engineering construction projects that are geared specifically towards safety. So the safety performance management really is geared towards that program, and really, by looking at the data and coming up with strategies that really are geared towards addressing the problems that your data is showing that you're experiencing within your state or locality. So what we're hoping is, once states have become comfortable setting their targets using the trend line analysis, that the program of improvements that we have annually in our highway safety improvement program will be able to address or maybe account for those in our target setting as well. Annually, we now have several, millions of dollars being spent on highway safety improvement program projects. I think it's important that we try to address or estimate the impact that those are going to have. So ultimately, this is our goal for safety performance management, is to really develop this performance-based highway safety improvement program. I mentioned, predicting some of the impacts that our projects might have, our engineering projects that come out of the Highway Safety Improvement Program might have. There's many tools that we have available. Some of these are very good predictive tools. They can help predict, what kinds of benefits or the amounts of benefits that you'll get from various projects. Some of these maybe aren't as useful for the pedestrian and bicycle countermeasures that we have, but there certainly are several out there that can help us do that for that measure as well. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the requirements in Federal Highway Safety Performance Management Rule. There is a requirement that states coordinate with MPOs during the target setting process. And I mentioned states have set their first round of targets this past August. So I know we saw varying degrees of this being achieved successfully. Again, this is the first year that we've undertaken safety performance management target setting for Federal Highway Administration and the states. So we realize that it's going to take a little time to improve upon this, but MPOs should be coordinating, or states should be coordinating with their MPOs throughout the target setting process. And the reason is because MPOs are required to adopt targets as well. They have two choices. They can adopt the state's targets that are set in August of each year, or they can develop their own targets for one of any of the, or all of the 5 performance measures. So that's coming up. MPOs are required to establish their targets coming up in February, a couple months from now. Another point I'll make here is MPOs do not report their targets to Federal Highway Administration. MPOs are reporting their targets to the state DOT that they reside in. The targets will be evaluated, or the process will be evaluated as well through some of the planning reviews that the local division office, Federal Highway Division office does, the certification reviews that take place with the MPO. So that's an important point to make as well. We do get a lot of questions about, what does that mean for an MPO? If they adopt the state's target, what does that mean? Or if they choose to set their own targets, what is the expectation? So I want to point you to this fact sheet, the website link. It contains a fact sheet on MPO safety performance measures. So what I've shown you here is exactly, that. It answers the question. If an MPO agrees to support a state's target, this is what the MPO should do on that left column. On the right column, if a state or an MPO decides to establish their own target, this is what they should plan to do. So if you're working with an MPO, again, we get several questions on this. This is a very good fact sheet. It should help answer a lot of the questions that you have as an MPO. A little bit about, the cycle that we're in. Again, this is the first year that we've undertaken this at Federal Highway. So, a little bit of a learning curve in many cases, but we did have, targets submitted by the state DOTs in this past August. Right now, we're in that phase where MPOs should be finalizing their targets, working with, their councils, their leadership to get buy-in on those targets, and then ensure that they, have a methodology to, formally let the state know what their targets are for those 5 safety performance measures. Once the targets are established, you can see there's quite a lag before Federal Highway will actually have the data available to evaluate the target. So this is an interesting problem, I guess, that we'll work through, but we will have targets for 2018. MPOs will finalize those in February. We won't actually have the data available until December of 2019 to evaluate whether the states have met their targets. So in the meantime, this is an annual effort, so the states will continue to set targets, and this will be an annual cycle where we'll be getting new targets and evaluating targets once we have the data available to evaluate them. So what does that entail? FHWA's target achievement evaluation. For FHWA's process, states have 2 opportunities really to have success, and they have either met their targets or they've made significant progress toward meeting their targets. And what that means is simply, for the 5 measures, if the states have met the targets that they've set out, at least 4 of those 5, then they have achieved or made significant progress. They have another opportunity in comparing their targets to the baseline years Those are the 5-year rolling averages from the year prior to the state's establishment of that target. So for 2018, that would be 2012 through 2016. So what we do there is we compare the state's 2018 target, for example, to that baseline, and if it's better than that baseline, if 4 or 5 of them are better than that baseline, well, then the state is making significant progress. So we'd say they are either meeting or making significant progress using this process. The consequences of not meeting your targets or not making significant progress on the targets, some feel this is a substantial consequence. Some feel that it's not. But essentially, we're saying that states, if you're not having success meeting your targets or making significant progress, well, then you're going to lose some of the flexibility that you have to spend some of those highway safety improvement program dollars in other parts of your program. So states will be required, if they don't meet their targets, to use their entire HISIP apportionment for the year prior to the target was set for safety projects. So it eliminates the ability for states to transfer some of those funds to other programs, which they do have the ability to do at this time. The other requirement, if a state does not meet their targets, would be that they need to take a look at their HSIP, their program of projects that they're putting forth, and really look hard at if there are some improvements they can make to that process. Again, if you're not making progress on these 5 measures, I think it's important to look deeper into the processes that states are using to develop program projects that do align with what the crash data is showing. So finally, safety performance management. Again, our goal is to create a performance-based highway safety improvement program. Again, those engineering type projects that annually the states put forth for federal aid dollars out of the highway safety improvement program. We really would like to see that become, as I say, more performance-based, so that it's really evidence-based, data-driven, and the projects are supporting that. And our overall goal, consistent with what MAP 21 put forth for safety performance management, is to achieve a significant reduction in fatalities and serious injuries on all public roads. We have seen an uptick in our fatalities and serious injuries over the past several years, and we'd like for this program, as it evolves, to help us do that, achieve that goal of reducing our fatalities and serious injuries. So I'm going to close with some websites that can give you more information on Federal Highway Safety Performance Management program. The first one has many fact sheets and resources that are available that should help answer your questions as we embark on this new effort for Federal Highway Administration in the safety area. The bottom one is the Highway Safety Improvement Program that I mentioned. This is really where safety performance management, we hope, evolves into improving the Highway Safety Improvement Program into one that, again, helps us achieve our safety goals.
Yeah. Great. Thanks so much, Dave. Oh, go ahead. So I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'll turn it over to Dan now.
Great. And it's good timing because we have a few minutes remaining, and I do have some questions I wanted to get your perspective on. So if I can get my screens to display correctly. I'm adding some contact information to the slide here to put up in front of everybody, because I can tell you we have more questions than I know we can get to in the time remaining. So I'd encourage you to please follow up with either our panelists or us at our general inquiries email account there to follow up. I've been responding to a few of you as I can with some more resources to answer some questions. But Dave, if I can keep it with you for just a moment and get on this whole topic of target setting, and I'm sure this has come up in your conversations, but I wonder if you've been talking with any agencies or hearing from agencies that may have Vision Zero goals, which many more cities and even states are kind of looking at Vision Zero to eliminate fatalities and thinking about, okay, if my stated goal is Vision Zero of zero fatalities, what do I need to be thinking about with respect to setting targets and interim sort of measures to get there? Have you heard that come up? And I guess another question along the same lines is, states are thinking and city and MPOs are thinking how aggressive to be with their targets. If they do have some stated goals to eliminate fatalities, Have you been hearing from people concerned about being too aggressive with targets, thinking that they might not achieve them, and so they need to step back a bit and do something more realistic? If you could speak to that issue just generally, and any conversations that have come up around that.
Sure, and that is definitely something we've heard. The Vision Zero or Target Zero, many states have that as a an overarching goal over their entire program. And so, yes, many states have used that information. If they have a zero goal several years out into the future, they've used that information along with maybe the trend analysis that I showed to possibly adjust where they set their target. We have seen that. We've also seen that with some of the state's strategic highway safety plans that are usually a little shorter term than what you might see in a Vision Zero goal, maybe out to 5 years or so. So that those often have targets as well that states have been using to adjust their trend lines that they're getting from the data that they're using, the 5-year rolling average data that they're using. So yeah, we've seen states use both of those as information to adjust the target that they set. And as far as aggressive targets, that varies widely, and it a lot of times depends on the political climate. Sometimes depends on the leadership's comfort with those targets. Many states are reluctant to set targets that are aggressive because they're afraid of failing. Other states think that they should set aggressive targets because that will help them gain momentum towards improving their programs, their processes towards achieving those targets. So we've seen a wide variety of those. It varies quite a bit across the spectrum.
Okay, great. Thank you for elaborating on that. Amy, question for you. You mentioned early on in your presentation, I think you had even listed out some, and I can't remember the exact phrasing, but they're like core reporting, core metrics that you're looking at with things like speeding related crashes, or I think maybe even alcohol was there. There were a few other kind of crash factors that were included. A lot of interest and a lot of questions about distraction as a cause of crashes or a factor in crashes, and wondering, do you have a similar metric that you require to be collected there? Because I know that from what I've heard, at least, and what I understand, there's some inconsistency in how distraction is maybe coded as a contributing factor when crash data is collected. So I wonder if NHTSA is looking at that as a core issue, and or thinking about maybe looking at gathering broad data from states on that distraction question.
No, thanks. That is a great question about distraction. So currently, NHTSA does not require or does not have a defined distracted driving measure. The measures that we have really are based mostly on the available FARS data. So as you alluded to, trying to assess really the size of the problem for distraction is very, very challenging. We have a lot of smart people working towards that. What NHTSA does require, even though it's not one of these grouped measures that I listed, our core performance measures, we do require, if a state does spend NHTSA grant funds on a distracted driving program, then we ask that they develop their own distracted driving measure. And that does not have to be based upon fatality data. That could be based upon other things, awareness surveys. We really are flexible and broad, and we work with the states to develop a measure that they feel is most appropriate for distracted driving. But again, to your question, there is not a required performance measure, core performance measure for distracted driving, because the FARS data for that is just really not there yet.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. We've got time for one more, and this is a question that I raised with both of you early on. We were talking about this webinar initially, and the issue continues to come up about not only crash data quality, which you've addressed a bit in the MUC conversation, and sort of the continual effort. And I see MUC as sort of it's a constant effort to continue to improve and get more detail out of our crash data. But there's this whole other side of the conversation, which is sort of the underreporting maybe of pedestrian and bicycle crashes. We kind of know that is an issue based on some research that's been done. I wonder, and I know that you all may not deal directly in crash underreporting possibly, but I wonder if that issue comes up in your conversations at NHTSA and at FHWA, and do you have any thoughts about the scale of that problem, and maybe some things that are being done to do a better job capturing the full scope of the safety problem? Maybe Dave, I don't know if you have a response to that. We can start with you and then see if Amy has a response as well.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know a lot about what we would do to improve upon the underreporting, but I have heard that. I have heard that concern, especially with you know, the non-motorized measure that we have, and it's a concern, obviously, and I think you know, definitely one that does merit some effort towards improving upon. We want our data to be as accurate as possible, so that our strategies that we're employing to correct the problems that we're identifying are able to really achieve what they need to achieve. So I have heard that concern. Yeah, I don't have a lot of
Sure.
information to share about how we might improve upon it.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Amy. Anything to add to that from your perspective?
No, unfortunately, I don't have a lot to add. You know, I will say NHTSA does not impute the pedestrian data. You know, we have heard that as well. There's some underreporting. So we take our numbers strictly from the crash reports. There is some imputation done for alcohol fatalities, but I would think probably the best advice that I can give for those on the call is really just to work with your local law enforcement agencies, and I think they're just educating on the importance of the crash data, and just having those who are collecting information on the crash report form just understand the importance of it. I mean, we understand law enforcement are just challenged in so many varieties just of what they're tasked to do. That certainly would be a first step. But again, NHTSA, from the national data set, we take it directly from what is entered on the state crash report and local crash reports.
And that's pretty common, and I think that's just a challenge or a caution to all of us when we look at numbers. Just know that there may be more there, and research that we've done here, and ongoing research, very important research, is happening to look more closely at comparing our crash data with hospital records and other injury outcomes to really understand the full scope of the safety problem. But I think being intelligent about, you know, like you're all sharing this very important information about where this data comes from, what it means, knowing what the numbers mean when we talk about them is critical, especially when we're trying to make arguments and make cases for improving safety. We should know, I guess, a lot of this, and I think you're doing a really good job helping us figure that out, and really promoting the idea of just setting targets and moving in that right direction. We see from the national data we're not really moving in the direction we want to be. So all the more emphasis we can place on setting targets and getting there is really critical. So I really appreciate both of you being here to share your expertise with us on this topic today. I'm sad to say that we don't have more time to answer questions and discuss this. I think in the next year, as we schedule and hold more webinars, we're going to really try to address this issue again. And I even think maybe dive into some more topics like crash reporting and underreporting, things of that nature. So that's an important note for everyone on the line. As you close out of the webinar, you're going to find a brief survey to ask you about the webinar today and how you think it went and what you've learned. There's an area for you to add some additional thoughts, and I'd encourage any of you who want to dive into a specific topic, maybe a different topic in pedestrian and bicycle safety, please let us know, because we are thinking about over the next year what topics we can be exploring. So your input is really critical in that area. I want to remind everybody that you are going to get that follow-up email from us later today. That'll have a lot of things in it, the link to the archive page, a way for you to generate your certificate of attendance. There's a lot of information that'll be there. So be on the lookout for that. Please follow up with us if you have any questions. I just want to say once again, thank you to Amy Schick and Dave Kopaz for delivering excellent presentations today. And I really appreciate you all sitting in on today's webinar. Have a great day. Thanks, everybody.